Good afternoon to our media partners and stakeholders at large watching online. We thank you all for joining us for an afternoon update here live from Huntsville City Schools Board of Education building, downtown Huntsville, Alabama. We're here today to provide an update on where we are relative to teaching and learning for next week. Some important plans and announcements. So, one priority today has been working to resume our Huntsville Virtual Academy, our HVA instruction, as quickly as possible. In particular, we want to get back to teaching and learning for those elementary grades as quickly as possible. Why those elementary grades, you may ask? The elementary grades, those are when students learn vital skills for the foundation for the future, such as key reading, math, literacy skills. So one particular focus of the district at large is Huntsville Virtual Academy students, but in particular, especially those Huntsville Virtual Academy students in grades K through 5, because that's where you learn so many of the vital skills for future success, not only in school, but in life. Secondly, some significant and positive news within our district is that students and teachers can now access those online HCS platforms. Some of those platforms, those include things like Clever, Schools PLP, Schoology, Zoom, things of that nature. That will help them access those online learning tools. However, one thing worth noting that's very important to understand, those tools cannot be accessed yet on the HCS network. So all that to say, students, if they'd like to access those platforms from home, they absolutely can. However, they cannot yet do so on the Huntsville City Schools network. Some other things worth noting. In particular, we talked about those online platforms. You'll recall as we started saying a week ago, we told everybody to stay off of the HCS online platforms and stay off of your HCS devices. Well, we've now learned students across all grade levels, as we said, they can access those HCS platforms. And now the newest development in that is HCS students grades K through 8, they can return to using their Chromebooks. So as we said a couple of days ago in Wednesday's update, Chromebooks do not appear to be impacted. So now students can go back to using those Chromebooks. However, again, they cannot be on the Huntsville City Schools network, just to clear that up. So if you're a student at home, grades K through 8, you have your HCS Chromebook, you can absolutely get on your Chromebook at home. You can absolutely get on those Huntsville City Schools platforms. Some more news, all high school students and teachers, as we already discussed, they should not log on those HCS devices. Like we discussed on Wednesday, it's the Windows devices that we want to re-examine, take a look at. So no changes in that regard. If you are a high school student with a Windows devices, continue to remain off your Windows device, your Huntsville City Schools device for the time being. The groups with those Windows devices, those are students in grades 9 through 12, as well as all teachers within the district. So all high school students and all teachers do need to stay off of those Windows devices, and they will need to do so until those devices are either, for the case of our teachers, replaced, and for our students reissued. Because just to recap our press event from Wednesday, high school students, they will be reissued their devices, and teachers, they will receive new devices. One thing that's important to note, as we talked about a couple of days ago, we do have those devices on standby for our teachers, and that's what we're in the process now, as early as today, getting ready to deploy new devices to our teachers. I learned in speaking with our IT team, that's not something we have just had in storage just for months. Fortunately, we ordered those recently for COVID, and so now we received those new devices sometime around Thanksgiving. We never imagined we would have to be deploying them for this. But now we are fortunate to be in a position where we do have those new teacher devices on standby and ready to go. Again, that were originally ordered for COVID and that have recently come in. So, as many of you know, we're now working at our high schools to collect devices from students. Many schools at the high school level have been hosting device drop-off days. I'll be sure to provide you guys some B-roll of that here shortly. So if you'll see in the video, students and families, they will be going in a carpool line at their schools, rolling down their windows, dropping off those devices for further examination. And again, on those teachers, we're working to provide them with new devices as quickly as possible, in particular, in order for us to be able to resume Huntsville Virtual Academy. And finally, students, we talked about the teacher devices. We're working to get those out as quickly as possible, deploy those new devices for our teachers. For students, for high school students, as you all know, it's the high school grades that will be reissued devices. They'll likely be receiving those sometime after the winter holiday. And that concludes my update for today, and at this time I welcome any questions.
Do you know why the MacBooks were affected compared to the Windows books? Like, what's the difference?
That's a great question. I asked our IT team the same thing. Based on the pattern and trends in terms of cybersecurity, generally speaking, Chromebooks and Mac devices are typically less impacted than...
Sorry.
You're trying to make me hit my post for today? So great question. Yes. So MacBooks and Chromebooks are typically less impacted in scenarios like this. It's oftentimes Windows devices that can be vulnerable to these types of issues.
For the investigation, do you know any more about what happened? Did a student click a link that they weren't supposed to? How did we get here?
No updates on the investigation today.
No idea when maybe it could be resolved?
No updates.
Okay.
I know kind of in the beginning there was a lot of printing. It seems like you're getting a lot of the non-high school students back on the digital platform, but is there any sort of a major push to get stuff printed for this next week or so, or is everything fine on that front?
That's a good question. Fortunately, a lot of our schools, they did print for looking ahead for a good little bit. Of course, our district print shop, they are still working to assist schools. I heard a conversation just a little while ago, our print shop on the phone with the school providing them support. So generally speaking, our schools are in good shape relative to printing, and our schools in some circumstances are continuing to provide students with additional printed supplies.
So we had heard something about the ransom amount. We heard that it was about $2.4 million. Are you able to say anything if that was the amount?
It's an ongoing investigation. I'm not sure where that number came from. That's certainly not something I've heard, and I'm not going to speak to that at this time as it's an ongoing investigation. I don't want to do anything to compromise the integrity of it.
Can you tell us about the cost to the system so far? What this is costing? Are you covered by insurance? Or
we are not covered by cybersecurity insurance, and as my understanding, it's not very common in the public education space or government space to have cyber insurance. Relative to cost at this point, I don't want to speculate on a number, but of course, when we are paying for a team of outside cybersecurity experts as we are, of course there's a cost associated with that.
And we'll learn that later?
Hopefully. Of course, very limited in what I can share at this point, because one thing worth noting is when an organization, I've learned, becomes vulnerable to cyber attacks of this nature, oftentimes the outside cybersecurity group who's providing assistance, they then become the new target. And so all that to say, we don't want to compromise any intel at this point or yet provide the group we're working with, because we don't want them to become victim of any type of cyber attack.
So you don't have insurance, but does the school district plan to get insurance to prevent something like this from happening again?
That's a good question. It's certainly something being examined and considered.
And what have been some of the challenges this week with the old school way of learning?
I'd say relative to challenges, I think back to last week when we first learned of the initial cyber threat, and a couple of things came to mind. Number one, we closed schools so that our IT team, they could be looking at and examining a clean network in order to assess the situation. And then secondly, one of the second reasons we closed schools a week ago was to give our teachers a couple of days to readjust lesson plans. I want to be very clear, our teachers can absolutely teach without technology. However, just like any of us in our day-to-day operations, you need a couple of notice if you're going to make any significant changes to the way you do things. So that was the second strategy in giving teachers those plans to readjust. All that to say, our teachers have done a phenomenal job readjusting, as they have all year long. As you all are aware, we're not only dealing with one circumstance relative to our cybersecurity threat, but we're also dealing with another situation, which is what we all across the country have been dealing with all year long since COVID-19. So absolutely, shout out to our teachers. They have found ways to readjust, readapt, and find ways to continue teaching and learning.
So is the devices, you had mentioned the teachers, is it the teachers in high school or is it the teachers all across the board?
So the question
Like
is,
for
who's getting
for
new devices?
Yeah, or for the devices where the teachers aren't able to use them, is it all the teachers or just the teachers in high school?
So the devices that we want to take a look at to examine, those devices are the Windows devices, and it's when it comes to those Windows devices, that's students in grades 9 through 12 with the Windows devices, as well as our teachers. And so in order to adjust and accommodate, all teachers, they will receive new devices. All high school students, they will receive reissued devices. K-8 students, not impacted on the Chromebooks.
To follow up on that, the new devices that are going to the teachers, that was something you already had planned, budgeted, that was not a new unexpected expense?
Right, it's something we ordered considering COVID-19. It's something that had already been ordered, so fortunately they are already here. Now it's just a matter of getting those out to our schools. And they will be receiving those as early as today, in some cases.
I know you can't talk specifics on the investigation, but are we close? Can you say that? Or are we looking into another few months of this?
As I said on Wednesday, this process is a marathon and not a sprint. You look at other entities who have dealt with similar types of situations, it's often the course of a number of months. So although we have made significant progress since last Monday, since we first learned of the threat, we likely have a long way to go in terms of remedy and resolution. But all that to say, we have made a lot of progress, and our IT team, they have done a fantastic job working through everything. And also we're very grateful for the support of law enforcement and our outside group of cybersecurity experts as well. All right, thank you all.